All right, so today we're diving into the story of Frank Masini. You know, the Italian-American serial killer from New Jersey in the early 90s. And we've got excerpts from his Wikipedia article.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is going to be a deep dive into the dark side. You know how some seemingly ordinary lives just go completely off the rails?
It really is fascinating how often serial killers just blend in, right? Massini had a family, a home. He even worked as a handyman. It's almost like they build this facade of normalcy to just conceal this hidden darkness. What do you think about that, listener?
Yeah, it's really unsettling to think about. He was born in Naples, Italy in 1944, moved to the U.S. when he was 17, settled in Livingston, New Jersey, had his first run-in with the law back in 1966. It was a burglary conviction. But then he seemingly got his act together. He got married, had 2 kids, owned 2 homes. You wouldn't suspect anything was wrong.
And that's what makes these cases so disturbing, so complex. Like, take Massini's first victim, his 85-year-old aunt, Anna Masini. This is in November 1991. He goes to visit her, supposedly to use the phone, and they end up having drinks and chatting. It's like a completely ordinary family visit. Then, without warning, he brutally attacks her.
Yeah, the Wikipedia article says he stabbed her multiple times in the neck, and then he sexually assaulted her after she was dead. It's just so hard to fathom that kind of violence, especially towards a family member.
Exactly, and this brutality is a recurring theme in his crimes. Just a month later, he murders again. This time it's 79-year-old Angelina Ioleggio, another relative, also attacked on a Wednesday. You picking up any patterns here, listener? Wednesdays? Elderly victims, the brutality. It's like a chilling blueprint.
Yeah, it's terrifying how these seemingly isolated incidents start to connect, and they form a pattern, a signature. Now I'm curious about robbing Angelina Ioleggio. Was that a new thing in his crimes? Or was that something that was also present in the first murder? Maybe just not as well documented.
That's a really good question, and it shows how investigations often uncover more details as they go on. In this case, robbery definitely seems to be a factor with Angelina Ioleggio. It adds another layer to his motives, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Massini's crimes don't stop there.
Right, a year later in November 1992, we have the double murder of Michael Krieger, he was 81, and his wife Betty, who was 78. These weren't just random elderly people. Masini knew them for years. He had done carpentry work for them. They probably felt completely comfortable letting him into their home.
And that's what makes this case even more chilling. The victims trusted him, they hired him for some housework, and then the day before Thanksgiving, he murders them. Michael was attacked with a letter opener, and Betty was stabbed repeatedly. The brutality escalates. It becomes even more personal, don't you think?
Absolutely. I have to ask about these specialized hiking boots mentioned in the Wikipedia article. It says a bloody footprint from those boots at the crime scene was a major break in the case. What was so special about them? How did it lead the police straight to Masini?
Well, these weren't your run-of-the-mill hiking boots. They had a unique sole pattern, maybe a limited edition or something, easily traceable. It's those little details, the ones you don't even think about. That can trip up even the most careful criminals. It's forensics at its best.
It's amazing how those tiny details can lead to justice. But even with the footprint and the ring and the pattern of his crimes, Masini initially pleads not guilty. What do you think about that, listener? Was it denial, arrogance, just a desperate attempt to delay what was coming next?
Well, it's not an uncommon reaction, especially when you're facing a mountain of evidence. But in Massini's case, the truth comes out. He undergoes psychiatric evaluations. He's deemed competent to stand trial. And he eventually confesses.
That confession spares him the death penalty, but he still ends up with a life sentence. He's eligible for parole in 2052. But he'll be well over 100 years old by then, so effectively he's spending the rest of his life behind bars. But his story isn't over, is it? There's still so much to uncover. So many questions about his motives, his descent into darkness.
You're absolutely right. We've barely scratched the surface. Now let's go deeper into the psychology of Frank Masini. Maybe you'll find some answers of your own, listener.
We've got this seemingly normal guy, right? Turns into a brutal killer, targeting elderly people that he knew, often on Wednesdays. The why is just as important as the what. What could drive someone to do something like this?
That's the real question, isn't it? I mean, we can't get inside Manini's head, but we can analyze the patterns of his crimes and try to, connect them to broader psychological profiles and criminological theories.
Like the Wednesday thing? Is that just a coincidence? Or could it be tied to something deeper, like a specific routine in his life, maybe his work schedule or something?
It's possible. Serial killers often incorporate parts of their everyday lives into their crimes. It could be for a sense of control, or even a twisted sense of normalcy, amidst the chaos they're creating.
It's almost as if the normalness of a Wednesday makes it even more jarring, more unsettling. It's like this dark secret hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. And then there's the choice of victims, all elderly, all known to him. I mean, some people might say it's a sign of cowardice, preying on the vulnerable. But what does that tell us about his psychological state?
Could it be a power dynamic? Like maybe he felt powerless in other parts of his life, so he exerted control over those he perceived as weaker?
It's a definite possibility. There's often a sense of inadequacy or frustration driving these types of crimes. And the fact that he knew his victims adds a whole other layer of complexity. Was it like a betrayal of trust? Or was there something more insidious going on, like a hidden resentment just simmering beneath the surface?
That's what I find so disturbing about it. The violation of trust. These weren't strangers. He had relationships with them. He was in their homes, probably even shared meals with them. It's chilling to think about.
It really is. And then there's the sexual assault post-mortem, which is a particularly dark element. I mean, that points to some deeper psychological issues. This goes beyond just, exerting power or control. What do you think, listener?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, necrophilia is complex, disturbing. It suggests a fascination with death, a complete detachment from the victim's humanity.
It's like a morbid curiosity, this desire to possess and control, even in death. And this brings us to the big question. What was the breaking point for Masini? What triggered his descent into this depravity?
Was there a specific event? Or was it more of a gradual erosion of his psyche? Maybe a slow buildup of resentment or frustration, or even some kind of traumatic experience that warped his perception of the world.
Well, we may never know for sure, but the Wikipedia article does mention his early brush with the law. You know that burglary conviction back in '66? Could that have been like a precursor, a sign of his underlying criminal tendencies?
It's definitely possible. Maybe he was always capable of this darkness, and that burglary was just the tip of the iceberg. Or maybe it was a catalyst, a first taste of power that awakened something sinister inside him.
It's like a puzzle with missing pieces. And that's what makes these cases so fascinating and so frustrating at the same time. We're left grappling with all the what ifs and the whys, trying to make sense of something that just doesn't make sense.
Which brings us to his confession. He says, "I need help. Please help me. I'm very sorry. God forgive me." Do you think there was any genuine remorse there, listener? Or was it all calculated? A plea for leniency, knowing that he was facing serious consequences?
Hard to say. The human mind is a complicated thing, capable of both great compassion and terrible cruelty. Maybe it's a bit of both, like a desperate attempt to grab onto some kind of redemption in the face of his own monstrous acts.
It's almost Shakespearean, the inner turmoil, the battle between good and evil, all playing out in one mind. And while Masini is left to face his own demons in prison, we're left to grapple with the bigger implications of his case.
Exactly. This isn't just about one man's crimes. It's about the darkness that exists in us all. It's about understanding the root causes of violence, identifying the warning signs, and intervening before tragedy strikes.
Which brings up an important question. Could Masini's crimes have been prevented? Were there red flags that were missed? Opportunities for intervention that could have changed everything? Could they have saved the lives of his victims?
It's a question that haunts a lot of people. Criminologists, psychologists, we analyze these cases, look for patterns, try to understand the motivations, all in the hope of finding ways to prevent these things from happening again. But the truth is, there are no easy answers.
It's a constant battle, trying to stay one step ahead of the darkness. And that's what makes this deep dive so important. It's not just about understanding Frank Masini. It's about understanding human nature, the fragility of our own sanity, and the need to be vigilant in a world where evil can be lurking anywhere.
Yeah, and sometimes the most unsettling realization is that the monsters we fear aren't lurking in the shadows. They're hiding in plain sight, disguised as ordinary people, living ordinary lives.
It's a scary thought, right? Anyone could be hiding something, even people we think we know really well. It all comes back to Masini's normal life. He had a wife, kids, a home, a job. How do you even reconcile that with what he did?
It's one of the most mind-boggling things about these cases, how they can just compartmentalize like that, separate the darkness from their everyday life. I think it really shows just how complex the human mind is. Evil doesn't always wear a mask,
It's like there were two Frank Masinis, the family man, the handyman, and then the monster who did these awful things.
Exactly, and that's what makes these cases so difficult to understand, to predict, to prevent. We're always looking for signs, red flags. But the most dangerous people are the ones who blend right in.
Which makes me wonder, how can we even protect ourselves if evil can hide so well? There's no guidebook on how to spot a serial killer next door, is there?
I wish there was, but knowledge is power, right? The more we learn about these individuals, their psychology, their behavior patterns, the better we can recognize those potential warning signs. It's not about living in fear, it's about being informed and aware.
So what are some key takeaways for our listeners? What can we learn from Masini's story to help navigate the world a little safer, maybe a little more cautiously?
Well, first and foremost, always trust your gut. If something feels wrong, if someone's behavior is setting off alarm bells, don't ignore it. Pay attention to patterns, to inconsistencies, anything that just seems off.
That makes sense. And what about society as a whole? Is there anything we can do to try and stop these tragedies from happening?
Absolutely. We need to create a culture of awareness, encourage people to talk openly, and build support systems for those struggling with mental health. Or for those who show signs of violent behavior, early intervention is crucial.
So it sounds like Masini's story is a cautionary tale, reminding us that we can't be complacent. Evil exists even in the places we least expect it.
That's right. And while we may never fully get rid of darkness, we can try to shed light on it, understand it, and empower ourselves with knowledge. It's the best defense we've got.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the life and crimes of Frank Masini, I want to leave our listeners with this. The human mind is a maze, full of twists and turns, darkness and light. And while we may never fully grasp why someone would do such horrific things, we can learn from these stories, grow from them, and work towards building a world where these tragedies are less likely to happen.
And maybe, just maybe, listener, you can be more than just a listener. You can be part of the conversation about crime, justice, and the complexities of being human.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Remember, knowledge is power, awareness is key, and even when facing evil, hope remains.